Introduction of hooves and hilarity. In the whimsical town of Bumbleburg, where the grass seemed to sway to its own rhythm, and laughter echoed through the cobblestone streets like a merry melody, an event of truly absurd proportions was about to unfold. Bumbleburg, known for its quaint charm and a population that thrived on the ordinary, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight of extraordinary antics, all thanks to an unsuspecting protagonist with 4 hooves and a braying laugh that could shake the very foundations of seriousness. The tale begins with the unexpected absence of the esteemed Judge Horsington, a figure respected for his solemnity and gravitas in the local courtroom. As fate would have it, the responsibility of maintaining order and justice fell upon the most unlikely candidate in the entire town, Donkey Dan, a seemingly ordinary donkey with a penchant for stubbornness and a laugh that could be heard from miles away. As news of Donkey Dan's accidental promotion spread through Bumbleburg like wildfire, the townsfolk found themselves torn between disbelief and sheer amusement. The very idea of a donkey donning the robes of justice seemed like a whimsical dream, yet reality proved stranger than fiction. Thus, the stage was set for a series of comical events that would forever alter the town's perception of the courtroom, turning it into a theater of laughter, where the hoofbeats of justice were accompanied by the braying symphony of a donkey judge. What ensued was a cascade of absurdity, as Donkey Dan, thrust into the role of interim judge, navigated the intricacies of the legal system with a grace that could only be described as uniquely his own. From the mishap with the oversized gavel to the creation of a Kangaroo Court, Donkey Dan's courtroom became a spectacle, captivating the entire town with its blend of unintentional comedy and bewildering rulings. As the donkey judge presided over cases ranging from the missing carrots mystery to the introduction of vegetable witnesses, Bumbleburg transformed into a haven of laughter, each courtroom session a performance that left the townsfolk in stitches. Donkey Dan's unconventional approach to justice extended beyond the legal realm, as he adorned himself with daffodil wigs and mandated applause be replaced with a chorus of brays, turning every trial into a feast of hilarity. But the legend of Donkey Dan did not confine itself within the borders of Bumbleburg. The news of the donkey judge's whimsical decrees spread far and wide, reaching neighboring towns that clamored for a taste of the laughter-inducing justice that had become the trademark of Bumbleburg's courthouse. And so, the story of Donkey Dan, the accidental judge, unfolded in a tapestry of hooves and hilarity, leaving an indelible mark on Bumbleburg's history. As the tale unfolds, prepare to be whisked away into a world where seriousness takes a backseat to the absurd, and the pursuit of justice becomes a riotous adventure in the company of a donkey who, against all odds, found himself at the center of a legendary comedy. Welcome to the town where hoofbeats met humor, and the courtroom became a stage for the most unforgettable act of accidental absurdity. Chapter 1: The Donkey's Day in Court. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting a warm glow over the quaint town of Bumbleburg. Nestled between rolling hills and meandering streams, the town exuded an air of serenity, its cobbled streets bustling with the daily affairs of the townsfolk. Little did they know that this ordinary day would mark the beginning of an extraordinary chapter in Bumbleburg's history. The courthouse, a stoic structure that stood at the heart of the town, was usually a bastion of solemnity. Judge Horsington, with his dignified demeanor and keen sense of justice, had long been the cornerstone of Bumbleburg's legal system. But on this fateful day, a twist of fate, or perhaps a cosmic jest, had other plans. News of Judge Horsington's well-deserved vacation rippled through Bumbleburg, and while the townsfolk initially regarded it as a routine occurrence, the revelation that a donkey named Dan would be presiding over the courtroom sent shockwaves through the community. Donkey Dan, a creature known for his stubborn ways and a laughter that echoed like a joyous symphony across the hills, was an unlikely candidate to fill the esteemed judge's robes. As the townsfolk gathered in hushed anticipation within the courthouse, the air buzzed with a peculiar mixture of curiosity and amusement. Donkey Dan, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation, ambled towards the courthouse with an air of nonchalance, his hooves clopping against the cobblestones. The courtroom, typically a bastion of order and decorum, crackled with an energy that hinted at the impending absurdity. The townspeople, lined up in their Sunday best, exchanged bemused glances, unsure whether to brace themselves for a comedic spectacle or to mourn the temporary departure of judicial solemnity. Donkey Dan, however, appeared unfazed by the weight of the occasion. With a flick of his ears and a swish of his tail, he ascended the imposing judge's bench, the gravity of the oversized gavel before him lost on the donkey's casual demeanor. His eyes, framed by a pair of long, floppy ears, surveyed the room, taking in the expectant faces of the townsfolk. The bailiff, a befuddled but determined badger, announced the commencement of the court proceedings, and with that, Donkey Dan's journey into the realm of judicial absurdity began. As he attempted to grasp the cumbersome gavel, it slipped from his hooves, embarking on a whimsical journey of its own, bouncing off walls and furniture like a mischievous sprite. The courtroom erupted in laughter as the townsfolk struggled to maintain their composure. And so, in the first chapter of this uproarious tale, the stage was set for an unprecedented journey through the corridors of justice, with Donkey Dan at the helm, blissfully unaware of the hilarity that would ensue. Little did Bumbleburg know that the echoes of laughter sparked by the donkey judge's unintentional antics would reverberate through the town for days to come, turning the solemn courthouse into an arena of amusement and the ordinary into the extraordinary. The tale had just begun, and Bumbleburg was about to embark on a journey into the realms of hoof-stomping hilarity.
Chapter 2: The Unlikely Promotion. Amidst the rolling meadows that bordered the whimsical town of Bumbleburg, Donkey Dan found solace in the gentle sway of the grass and the soft whispers of the breeze. Little did he know that tranquility was about to be disrupted by a twist of fate so bizarre it would transform him from a humble grazer into the unsuspecting star of Bumbleburg's most uproarious spectacle. As Donkey Dan grazed peacefully, blissfully unaware of the comical storm brewing in the town center, the local town council, known for their penchant for absent-minded decisions, convened to address the unexpected vacancy in the judge's seat. Judge Horsington's well-deserved vacation had left a void, and in a moment of absent-mindedness that would become the stuff of legend, the council cast their gaze upon the most unlikely of candidates, the unassuming donkey contentedly munching on clover in the meadow. The decision, made in haste and perhaps fueled by a touch of whimsy, resulted in the unwitting promotion of Donkey Dan to the coveted position of interim judge. It was a decision so peculiar, so unexpected, that the town council itself was caught in a fit of laughter as they drafted the official decree, sealing the fate of Bumbleburg's courthouse for the days to come. Word of the council's decision spread through Bumbleburg like wildfire, igniting a storm of disbelief and mirth that swept through the cobbled streets and meandering alleys. Residents exchanged incredulous glances, unsure whether to consider the news a prank or the bizarre reality of their judicial system. Laughter echoed from door to door as the townsfolk tried to wrap their minds around the fact that the venerable Judge Horsington's robes would now be donned by a donkey. As the news reached every corner of Bumbleburg, the town square became a hubbub of gossip and speculation. Conversations buzzed with incredulity, and chuckles reverberated against the quaint facades of the buildings. Donkey Dan, oblivious to the uproar he had inadvertently caused, continued grazing in the meadow, his ears flicking lazily at the distant sounds of amusement. In the courthouse, the oversized judge's bench awaited its new occupant, and the townsfolk couldn't help but wonder how the stoic courtroom would fare under the rule of a donkey. The council's absent-minded decision had set the stage for a chapter of absurdity, turning an ordinary day into an extraordinary farce. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Bumbleburg, the unsuspecting Donkey Dan prepared to step into the limelight, blissfully unaware of the laughter and chaos that awaited him in the courthouse. The town's newfound judge, not by choice but by the whims of fate, was about to become the star of a story that would go down in Bumbleburg's history as the epitome of unexpected hilarity.
Chapter 3: The Gavel Mishap. The morning sun cast a warm glow over Bumbleburg as Donkey Dan, blissfully ignorant of the upcoming hilarity, made his way towards the courthouse. The townsfolk, curious and brimming with anticipation, had gathered in clusters outside the imposing doors, their stifled laughter creating a buzz that hinted at the absurdity about to unfold. The courthouse, once a bastion of solemnity, now bore witness to an event that would go down in Bumbleburg's history as one of the most comical mishaps to grace its halls. Donkey Dan, with an air of nervous determination, trotted through the doors, his hoofs echoing against the marble floors. The judge's bench, a looming structure that had witnessed countless serious deliberations, awaited its new occupant. However, the council's oversight in selecting an oversized gavel proved to be the first act in a comedy of errors that would soon captivate the entire town. As Donkey Dan ascended the judge's bench, the townsfolk gathered in the courtroom exchanged amused glances. The gavel, comically large in comparison to the donkey's modest hooves, lay before him like an unwitting prop in a theatrical performance. It seemed that the council's absent-minded decision had extended beyond Donkey Dan's appointment, making its mark on every facet of the courthouse. The proceedings began, and an expectant hush fell over the courtroom. Donkey Dan, acutely aware of the eyes upon him, eyed the oversized gavel with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. In an attempt to assert his newfound authority, he raised the gavel high above his head, the gravity of the moment punctuated by the awkward silence that enveloped the room.
With a resounding thud, Donkey Dan brought the gavel down upon the judge's bench, or at least, that was the intention. However, in a twist of slapstick fate, the oversized gavel slipped from the donkey's grasp, sailing through the air with a trajectory that seemed to defy gravity. The courtroom, initially hushed, erupted into peals of laughter as the gavel bounced off walls and furniture, performing a comical ballet that would have put the most agile circus performer to shame. Donkey Dan, momentarily frozen in embarrassment, watched helplessly as the gavel ricocheted around the room like a mischievous rabbit, leaving chaos and hilarity in its wake. The townsfolk, unable to contain their amusement, clutched their bellies and wiped away tears of laughter as the gavel's escapades continued. In that moment, Bumbleburg's courthouse was transformed into a theater of absurdity, with the oversized gavel taking center stage in a slapstick performance that would be retold for generations. Donkey Dan, though inadvertently, had ushered in a chapter of hilarity that would become synonymous with his brief but unforgettable stint as the town's accidental judge. As the gavel finally came to rest, the echoes of laughter lingered in the air, marking the beginning of a series of comical misadventures that would redefine Bumbleburg's perception of justice. Little did the townsfolk know that the gavel mishap was merely the opening act in a symphony of absurdity, with Donkey Dan as the unwitting conductor, orchestrating laughter in the most unexpected of ways.
Chapter 4: A Literal Kangaroo Court. In the wake of the gavel mishap that had left the townsfolk of Bumbleburg in stitches, Donkey Dan, undeterred by the uproarious laughter that echoed through the courthouse, embarked on a new chapter of judicial eccentricity. Fueled by a zealous desire to uphold justice in the most unconventional manner, the donkey judge introduced a concept that would be etched in the annals of Bumbleburg's history, the Kangaroo Court. Convinced, in his own peculiar way, that actual kangaroos possessed unparalleled judgment, Donkey Dan declared the appointment of a kangaroo as his deputy judge. The townsfolk, still recovering from the gavel mishap, exchanged bewildered glances as a live kangaroo was ushered into the courtroom, its long hind legs carrying an air of unexpected authority. The kangaroo, with an expression that seemed to convey both confusion and determination, hopped onto the judge's bench alongside Donkey Dan. The donkey, oblivious to the skepticism that permeated the room, introduced the kangaroo to the gathered audience as his esteemed deputy judge, a creature of wisdom and impartiality. Chaos erupted as the courtroom, once a bastion of order, transformed into a stage for the most ludicrous performance ever witnessed in Bumbleburg. The kangaroo, unfamiliar with the solemnity of legal proceedings, hopped about with an unbridled enthusiasm that defied the gravity of the situation. Somersaults and high jumps became the kangaroo's preferred modes of locomotion, leaving the townsfolk in stitches with each acrobatic display. Donkey Dan, undeterred by the escalating absurdity, earnestly presented cases to his newfound deputy judge. The townsfolk, initially unsure of how to react, soon found themselves swept up in the infectious energy of the Kangaroo Court. The solemnity of legal matters gave way to a carnival of laughter, with the kangaroo's antics becoming the highlight of every trial. Verdicts were delivered with unparalleled flair. Instead of the customary nods or stern pronouncements, the kangaroo expressed its judgment through a series of comical somersaults, eliciting uproarious laughter from the onlookers. Bumbleburg's courthouse had become a circus, with Donkey Dan and the kangaroo as the star performers in a show that defied all expectations. As the Kangaroo Court proceedings continued, the laughter that reverberated through Bumbleburg reached a crescendo. The once stern courtroom had been transformed into a realm of joyous absurdity, where justice was dispensed with acrobatic finesse and the donkey judge presided over a spectacle that transcended the boundaries of the ordinary. Little did Bumbleburg know that the Kangaroo Court was just the beginning of Donkey Dan's whimsical journey through the realms of judicial peculiarity. The town, now accustomed to the donkey's unorthodox approach to justice, awaited with bated breath to see what hilarious twist would unfold next in the courthouse. Donkey Dan's tenure as the accidental judge had become a source of endless amusement, and the town was eager to discover what other surprises lay in store in the chapters yet to come.
Chapter 5: The Case of the Missing Carrots. The quaint town of Bumbleburg, now accustomed to the whimsical proceedings unfolding in its courthouse, found itself thrust into a new chapter of hilarity, one that began with the curious case of Farmer Jenkins' missing carrots. It was a mystery that had gripped the community, and the townsfolk eagerly awaited Donkey Dan's unique brand of justice to unravel the truth. As the donkey judge, blissfully unaware of the complexities of investigative procedures, took his seat on the oversized judge's bench, Farmer Jenkins stood before the court, a look of desperation etched across his face. His prized carrots, the envy of every gardener in Bumbleburg, had vanished without a trace, leaving the usually stoic farmer on the verge of tears. In a display of unwavering determination, Donkey Dan declared the courthouse open for the trial of the century, the case of the missing carrots. Instead of opting for a conventional investigation, the donkey judge, ever the proponent of unorthodox methods, decided to summon all the vegetables in Bumbleburg to the witness stand. The townsfolk, initially perplexed by the turn of events, watched with a mix of amusement and disbelief as a parade of vegetables made their way into the courthouse. Potatoes, cucumbers, tomatoes, and even the humble radishes stood in the witness box, their silent presence lending an air of surrealism to the proceedings. Donkey Dan, donning a daffodil wig that added an extra layer of eccentricity to the courtroom, embarked on a series of cross-examinations that defied the norms of legal practice. The potatoes were grilled with questions about their whereabouts on the night in question. The cucumbers were asked if they had seen anything unusual, and the tomatoes were subjected to intense scrutiny. The absurdity reached its peak when a particularly cheeky cucumber claimed to have witnessed the carrots engaging in a clandestine meeting with the mischievous radishes under the moonlight. The courtroom erupted in laughter, and even Donkey Dan, with his daffodil-adorned head, struggled to maintain his composure. As the cross-examinations continued, the vegetables, unable to speak in human tongues, remained silent witnesses to the unfolding comedy. Farmer Jenkins, torn between exasperation and amusement, could only watch as his quest for justice took an unexpected turn into the realms of vegetable theatre. The townsfolk, initially bewildered, soon embraced the absurdity of the proceedings, finding joy in the sheer unpredictability of Donkey Dan's courtroom. The case of the missing carrots became a legendary tale in Bumbleburg, with the townspeople regaling each other with stories of the day when the courthouse became a vegetable haven, and justice was dispensed with a side of absurdity. Little did Bumbleburg know that this chapter in the donkey judge's tenure was merely a prelude to more outrageous escapades. As the laughter subsided and the vegetables were escorted out of the courthouse, the town eagerly awaited the next twist in the tale, ready to immerse itself once again in the hilarity that had become synonymous with the accidental judge and his unconventional pursuit of justice.
Chapter 6: Donkey Dan's Fashion Faux Pas. The sun cast its golden glow over Bumbleburg as the courthouse doors creaked open, signaling the commencement of another day in the world of Donkey Dan's peculiar brand of justice. The townsfolk, by now accustomed to the unpredictable twists and turns within the courthouse, gathered with a mix of anticipation and amusement, wondering what comical escapade the donkey judge would unfold next. As Donkey Dan took his place on the oversized judge's bench, a glint of mischief sparkled in his eyes. It seemed that the donkey, not content with simply dispensing justice in a conventional manner, was about to introduce a new element to the courtroom, a touch of floral finesse. The trial at hand was a particularly heated one, involving a dispute over property boundaries between two eccentric neighbors, Miss Primrose and Mr. Pumpernickel. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as arguments were exchanged, and the townsfolk observed with bated breath, unsure of how Donkey Dan would navigate this thorny legal terrain. In a moment that would forever be etched in Bumbleburg's collective memory, Donkey Dan, with a flair for the dramatic, reached beneath the judge's bench and produced a wig made entirely of daffodils. With utmost seriousness, he placed the floral creation atop his head, the bright yellow petals framing his donkey ears in a display of botanical eccentricity. The courtroom, initially silent in anticipation, erupted into waves of laughter as the townsfolk beheld the sight of Donkey Dan adorned in a daffodil wig. The gravity of the trial took a backseat to the sheer absurdity of the donkey judge's fashion statement. The daffodil wig, though undoubtedly charming in its own right, became a symbol of Donkey Dan's unorthodox approach to the solemn business of justice. Undeterred by the laughter that reverberated through the courthouse, Donkey Dan, now a vision of floral extravagance, proceeded to preside over the trial with the utmost seriousness. The litigants, the jury, and even the bailiff struggled to maintain composure as they gazed upon the donkey judge's whimsical transformation. As arguments continued to unfold, the daffodil wig seemed to take on a life of its own, swaying with each emphatic gesture made by Donkey Dan. The townsfolk, once embroiled in the intensity of the trial, found themselves captivated by the floral spectacle before them. The serious business of property boundaries became a colorful comedy, with the donkey judge at the center of the floral extravaganza. By the time the trial concluded, the daffodil wig had become a symbol of Donkey Dan's sartorial eccentricity, topic of conversation that would resonate through the town for days to come. Bumbleburg, once a haven of ordinary routines, had now embraced the unexpected, finding joy in the donkey judge's colorful interpretations of justice. As Donkey Dan exited the courthouse, the daffodil wig still perched atop his head, the townsfolk watched with a mixture of amusement and affection. The accidental judge had once again transformed the serious into the comical, leaving behind a courtroom that, for all its legal dilemmas, had become a stage for laughter and floral frivolity. Little did Bumbleburg know that more chapters of hilarity awaited, as Donkey Dan continued his reign as the town's unwitting entertainer and arbiter of the absurd.
Chapter 7: The Order of Mandatory Braying. Bumbleburg had grown accustomed to the whimsical twists of fate that accompanied Donkey Dan's tenure as the accidental judge, but the townsfolk were about to experience a chapter that would redefine the very soundscape of the courthouse. In an unexpected turn of events, Donkey Dan, ever the arbiter of eccentricity, issued a decree that would resonate through the town, an order of mandatory braying. As the townsfolk gathered in the courthouse for another day of laughter-inducing justice, the air was charged with a sense of anticipation. The oversized gavel lay quietly on the judge's bench, and the donkey judge himself wore an air of determined resolve. The townsfolk, unsure of what awaited them, exchanged curious glances as Donkey Dan cleared his throat, signaling the commencement of a new judicial directive. In the interest of fairness and expressiveness, Donkey Dan proclaimed with a bray that echoed through the courtroom, "I hereby decree that all attendees shall henceforth express their approval or disapproval by braying instead of clapping." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom as the townsfolk tried to comprehend the magnitude of the donkey judge's proclamation. Clapping, the customary means of expressing agreement or disagreement, was now replaced by the guttural sounds of brays, an auditory transformation that left the townsfolk both bewildered and intrigued. The first trial under the order of mandatory braying involved a dispute over a backyard vegetable garden, and as Donkey Dan delivered his verdict, he awaited the response of the courtroom attendees. Instead of the usual applause, a cacophony of brays erupted, creating a symphony of absurdity that reverberated through Bumbleburg's courthouse. The townsfolk, initially hesitant, soon embraced the novelty of the braying decree. Each trial became a spectacle of sound, with the courtroom resonating with donkey laughter, creating an atmosphere of infectious joy. The order of mandatory braying had transformed the serious business of justice into a light-hearted affair, where approval and disapproval were expressed through the primal sounds of the donkey kingdom. Verdicts were accompanied by a chorus of brays, and as the townsfolk adapted to this peculiar form of expression, the courthouse became a haven of laughter. Donkey Dan, the unwitting conductor of this braying symphony, presided over trials with an air of regal authority, his donkey laughter blending seamlessly with the soundscape of the courtroom. The town, once baffled by the donkey judge's unorthodox rulings, now reveled in the sheer absurdity of the order of mandatory braying. Bumbleburg's courthouse, where justice had once been meted out with solemnity, had evolved into a stage for comic relief, where the unconventional became the norm, and every bray echoed the spirit of the town's newfound embrace of the whimsical. As the brays echoed through the courthouse, Donkey Dan, the accidental architect of this auditory revolution, continued his reign as the town's delightfully unconventional judge. The order of mandatory braying, though perplexing to some, became a symbol of Bumbleburg's ability to find joy in the most unexpected places. Little did the townsfolk know that more chapters of hilarity awaited them, as Donkey Dan's courtroom antics continued to redefine the boundaries of ordinary and extraordinary in the quirky town of Bumbleburg.
Chapter 8: The Hilarious Precedent. In the quirky town of Bumbleburg, where laughter echoed through cobblestone streets and the courthouse had become a stage for the most absurd of performances, Donkey Dan's judicial reign continued to defy expectations. The accidental judge, blissfully unaware of the conventions of traditional justice, had embarked on a journey of whimsy that had turned the serious business of the courtroom into a side-splitting spectacle. As news of Donkey Dan's unconventional rulings spread like wildfire, the townsfolk eagerly anticipated the next chapter in the donkey judge's repertoire. Little did they know that the donkey's penchant for hilarity would soon set a precedent that would redefine the very nature of legal disputes in Bumbleburg. In one memorable case that would go down in history as the hilarious precedent, Donkey Dan presided over a dispute between Farmer O'Malley and Mrs. McGregor, involving the age-old question of whose goats had eaten the prized rose bushes in the town square. Instead of opting for a traditional trial, Donkey Dan, in a stroke of whimsical genius, declared that any future disputes involving livestock would be resolved through a donkey race. The announcement, met initially with a mix of bewilderment and amusement, soon became a rallying cry for the townsfolk. The prospect of resolving disputes through a donkey race transformed the courthouse into a hubbub of excitement. Farmers and townspeople alike, intrigued by the novel approach to justice, eagerly signed up their animals as willing participants in the first-ever Bumbleburg donkey race. The day of the race dawned, and the town square, typically a venue for serious matters and legal deliberations, was transformed into a racetrack for donkeys, goats, and even a particularly nimble chicken. Donkey Dan, resplendent in his daffodil wig and with an air of unparalleled seriousness, took his place at the judge's bench, ready to oversee the most unconventional resolution to a legal dispute the town had ever witnessed. The townsfolk lined the square, their laughter and anticipation creating an atmosphere of festive absurdity. Farmer O'Malley's goat, affectionately named Buttercup, and Mrs. McGregor's donkey, Sir Reginald, stood side by side, their expressions mirroring the bewilderment of their human counterparts. With a bray that signaled the start of the race, the animals thundered around the town square in a flurry of hooves, feathers, and fur. Donkey Dan, with a gavel in hand that seemed almost comically out of place in the midst of the race, watched with an air of dignified solemnity as the animals jostled for the lead. The race, far from a display of athletic prowess, became a side-splitting comedy, with the goats occasionally pausing to nibble at the flower beds and the donkeys executing impromptu dance moves in the midst of the chaos. The townsfolk, once embroiled in the seriousness of legal disputes, now found themselves doubled over with laughter as the hilarious precedent unfolded before their eyes. As Sir Reginald crossed the finish line first, Donkey Dan delivered his verdict with a bray of approval, officially declaring Mrs. McGregor the winner of the race and, by extension, the rightful owner of the untouched rose bushes. The courthouse, once a bastion of legal decorum, erupted into applause, laughter, and an encore of brays. The hilarious precedent had set a tone for future legal disputes in Bumbleburg, turning the courthouse into a carnival of laughter where donkey races became the order of the day. Donkey Dan, inadvertently becoming the mastermind behind the town's newfound tradition, continued to preside over trials with an air of unbridled joy. As the townsfolk returned home, still chuckling at the day's events, they couldn't help but marvel at the transformative power of Donkey Dan's accidental judiciary. Bumbleburg, once a town bound by the solemnity of legal proceedings, had become a haven of laughter, with the donkey judge at the helm, orchestrating absurdity in the most delightful of ways. Little did the townsfolk know that more chapters of hilarity awaited them, as Donkey Dan's courtroom antics continued to redefine the boundaries of ordinary and extraordinary in the whimsical town of Bumbleburg. The hilarious precedent had become a testament to the town's ability to find joy in the most unexpected places, leaving behind a legacy of laughter that would endure for generations to come.
Chapter 9. A Feast of Absurdity. Word of Donkey Dan's comical courtroom escapades in the whimsical town of Bumbleburg had transcended the cobblestone streets and reached the ears of neighboring towns. The infectious laughter that echoed through the courthouse had become a beacon of amusement, drawing curious visitors from far and wide. Donkey Dan, the accidental judge with a penchant for whimsy, suddenly found himself in demand beyond the borders of Bumbleburg. As the news spread, neighboring towns, once solemn bastions of legal decorum, sent emissaries to request the services of the donkey judge. The allure of laughter, the promise of legal proceedings transformed into a side-splitting spectacle, proved irresistible. Donkey Dan, unwittingly becoming a regional sensation, graciously accepted the invitations, embarking on a journey that would turn neighboring courthouses into stages for his absurd brand of justice. The once serious courthouse of Bumbleburg, now synonymous with hilarity, became a hub of laughter that resonated far beyond its borders. The townsfolk, once accustomed to the donkey's eccentric rulings, embraced the unexpected influx of visitors with open arms. Bumbleburg, it seemed, had become a destination for those seeking not only justice but also a feast of absurdity served with a side of unbridled mirth. As Donkey Dan traveled to neighboring towns, his reputation as the unwitting entertainer of the legal world preceded him. Courthouses that had long been enshrouded in the solemnity of legal proceedings suddenly found themselves transformed into arenas of amusement. The donkey judge, with his daffodil wig and the oversized gavel, continued to preside over trials with an air of dignified whimsy. In one neighboring town, a dispute over property boundaries was resolved not through traditional surveys or legal documents but by a game of musical chairs. The litigants, once stern-faced and resolute, found themselves swept up in the laughter that permeated the courthouse as they circled chairs with an earnestness that defied the gravity of the situation. In another town, a case involving a missing pie was resolved not through witness testimonies but by a donkey dance-off. Donkey Dan, with his unmistakable brays serving as the musical backdrop, twirled and hoofed alongside the litigants, turning the courthouse into a dance floor of hilarity. The neighboring towns, initially bewildered by the unexpected turn of events, soon embraced the whimsical charm of Donkey Dan's judicial theatrics. The sternest-faced litigants, accustomed to the gravity of legal proceedings, found themselves unable to contain their amusement as they became unwitting participants in the donkey judge's comedic symphony. Back in Bumbleburg, the townsfolk reveled in the newfound fame of their accidental judge. The once serious courthouse, now a legendary venue for laughter, became a symbol of the town's ability to find joy in the most unexpected places. The echoes of brays and laughter continued to resonate through the cobbled streets, turning Bumbleburg into a haven of whimsy that attracted visitors from far and wide. As Donkey Dan returned to Bumbleburg, his journey beyond the town's borders had become a chapter in the tale of the accidental judge. The courthouse, once a solemn seat of justice, had become a beacon of laughter that transcended geographical boundaries. The neighboring towns, having experienced a feast of absurdity served by the donkey judge, would forever remember Bumbleburg as the town where legal proceedings became a delightful spectacle, and justice was dispensed with a bray and a hearty laugh. Little did the townsfolk know that more chapters of hilarity awaited them, as Donkey Dan's courtroom antics continued to redefine the boundaries of ordinary and extraordinary in the whimsical town of Bumbleburg. The accidental judge had become a legend, and the courthouse, now a symbol of joyous absurdity, stood as a testament to the town's ability to turn even the most serious matters into a feast of laughter.
Chapter 10: The Legacy of Laughter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the whimsical town of Bumbleburg, the final chapter of Donkey Dan's tenure as the accidental judge unfolded. The courthouse, once a stage for the most absurd of judicial theatrics, bore witness to a poignant moment as the donkey judge, with a final bray that echoed through the cobbled streets, stepped down from the oversized judge's bench. Donkey Dan's tenure as the interim judge had come to an end, but the legacy of laughter lingered in the hearts of Bumbleburg's residents. The town, forever changed by the unexpected turn of events, found itself in possession of a treasure trove of tales, of the donkey who briefly donned the robes of justice, turning the solemn courtroom into a stage for comedy. The townsfolk, once unsure of how to react to the donkey judge's eccentric rulings, now shared stories of the whimsical trials that had become synonymous with Bumbleburg's courthouse. The oversized gavel, the daffodil wig, the order of mandatory braying, the hilarious precedent, and the feast of absurdity, all became chapters in the legendary tale of Donkey Dan, the accidental judge who had brought joy to a town in the most unexpected of ways. As the news of Donkey Dan's exploits spread beyond Bumbleburg, neighboring towns marveled at the town's ability to find humor even in matters of justice. The once serious courthouse, now a symbol of joyous absurdity, became a destination for those seeking not only legal resolutions but also a dose of laughter served by the donkey judge. While Donkey Dan may have relinquished his position as the interim judge, the legacy of laughter he left behind endured. The townsfolk, now accustomed to the whimsy that had become a part of their daily lives, continued to gather in the courthouse square, sharing anecdotes and reliving the moments when the donkey judge had turned legal proceedings into a side-splitting spectacle. The legend of Donkey Dan became a reminder that even in the most serious matters, a touch of humor could make life a bit more delightful. The courthouse, once a bastion of solemnity, had become a beacon of joy, and the townsfolk, whether they had been litigants or spectators, carried the laughter of Bumbleburg with them as they went about their lives. As the seasons changed and the town embraced the ebb and flow of everyday life, the courthouse stood as a silent witness to the legacy of laughter that Donkey Dan had left behind. The oversized gavel, now a quirky relic displayed with pride, became a symbol of the town's ability to find joy in the most unexpected places. And so, in the heart of Bumbleburg, where laughter echoed through the cobbled streets and the courthouse had become a stage for comedy, the legend of Donkey Dan lived on. The accidental judge had become a timeless figure, a source of inspiration for those who believed that even in the midst of seriousness, a hearty bray and a touch of whimsy could turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. As the townsfolk gathered in the courthouse square, sharing tales and reliving the moments of hilarity, they couldn't help but feel a profound gratitude for the donkey who had briefly donned the robes of justice. The legacy of laughter had become an integral part of Bumbleburg's identity, a testament to the town's resilience in finding joy in the most unexpected corners of life. And so, as the final bray of Donkey Dan lingered in the air, the whimsical town of Bumbleburg stood as a living testament to the transformative power of laughter, a legacy that would endure for generations to come, reminding the world that even in the most serious matters, a touch of humor could make life a bit more delightful.